Greeting everyone, my name's Tom Badillo. I'm here interviewing a bunch of our instructors at Clockwork Alchemy and beyond. And today we have Michael Cawelti, one of my old instructors. Michael, if you are in the steampunk verse, do you believe that you would side on the side of the pirates, the sky pirates, or the admiralty?
Well, pirates are always more fun, but I've always kind of been a Queen's man, if you will. So given your game that you do and the interaction, I have to admit I'd probably do Admiralty. Why? Because defense is always a better position. This is something that I talk about not only in how I teach swordplay, but also I believe defending a position is a stronger one.
Then, based on that, our game is defending your airship. You are on the Royal Airship Kamehameha. You are put on. The captain gives you the responsibility to defend. Sky pirates attack, and there's two ways that the pirates can attack: in the air. Now, because we carry the spice, the pirates do not want to sink us. Because the spice will be ruined in the seawater. So they are not going to blow us out of the water or out of the sky using long distance weapons. They are going to do a boarding action. And the boarding action could occur in the air or when they're moored. There is a steampunk book called, by Cheryl Priest, that uses the zombies of the steampunk verse called rotters. And if you're on the ground, there's a possibility that these zombies or these rotters will attack. What is your strategy if we're in the air?
Well, in the air, I assume it's rather like two ships at sea where they have to basically butt up against each other or be far enough so that ratlins can be swung over. And so you're really talking about 1 point of defense. On the ground, I would say you have 3 points of defense, although I suppose it could be if you had the setup and how the ground was laid up. Are you tethered to ropes and floating above it? Are you at a dock? Your physical space would determine how you would defend that. But let's assume on the ground that you have more than one area that you have to defend. So that has to do with personnel and how you lay them out and how many you have. The zombies, can they climb ropes? Are they just on a dock? How do you kill them? Do you have to chop off their head or a hit to the head? Is that kind of zombie? Are they quick zombies? Or are they the slow zombies? You know, all of that plays into it.
And just like in the video games that we grew up on, there are levels. And on level 1, they're slow zombies. And at the faster level, or at the higher levels, they are much, much faster. And just like the game that we play, one gentle touch anywhere on their body destroys the zombie. Or if we're in the air, if the congoers are the attackers, any touch, light touch, a boop, is going to be honored as a kill. So what are your thoughts?
Well, let's focus on air-to-air battle, because you have actual trained fighters against trained fighters and 1 point of inflection. And I think that's probably the most interesting. As you have the bags that represent, do they represent the ship and gunnels that you can hide behind, or do they represent the instructors?
They represent the instructors that can be pummeled.
Aha. So one touch of one of the pirates' weapons to one of them kills one of them.
Correct.
Okay. In that case, I would definitely have 2 layers of defense on the Admiralty side. One, swordsman, cutlass, whatever you're using, towards the front of the bags. If you can't be directly in front of it, which I would do to defend, then just to the side. Then as a second layer, I would have the polearms. And the idea is that as an attack happens, ironically, I would do it just the opposite for the pirates attacking. I would do pole arms in the front row and then to be rushed by the swordsman afterwards. The idea is to have your front line engage the other front line. And much like a push-it pike in the 16th century, where all the pikes leveled against each other, you had the guys with the double Zweihanders running down the aisles, cutting pikes and attacking through the lines. So that would be my suggestion, is point of first contact, and then it's how you deploy your second contact where you gain advantage. And then timing of that, who does what best first, has a big to do with the outcome. Also, I think you probably want to simplify your sword work. Obviously, you wouldn't want to be aiming at people's faces unless they're wearing masks, and not everybody is. So, so you're talking more of a body target. And anyone who's defending or attacking, for that matter, wild swings keeps you out of the game. In other words, you're deadly here, or you're not deadly here. If you're up high, they can duck it, and you're not supposed to aim at the face anyway. So, in terms of a pole arm coming in, so I would keep it very concise in terms of the parries. And can you grab a blade or a weapon?
No. No.
Okay. So any touch of that weapon is the poison.
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, and then I would be very good at binding, but not down, because if you bind down, then you're vulnerable to a cut back up, and it's very easy. So I would keep everything as a defender on a horizontal, parallel to the floor path, and then that way things can be controlled.
And as you taught in other classes that I've been in, on board ship, it's a very confined space, much like a minibus in San Francisco. So as you indicated, the friendly fire might be an issue.
Yes, absolutely. Tight spaces, smaller weapons are better. There's a gentleman I learned in WMA who teaches medieval knife fighting to SWAT teams all over the world. And excuse me, but his name is leaving. It's Peter, I think, but his name is leaving my mind at the moment. But I'll tell you a great story about confined spaces. This was right after 9/11 when we were talking. And he said he got on a plane with a backpack, a clipboard, hair ties, he had long hair, and a roll of quarters, a pocket full of quarters. And what he said was, if they were attacked and they had to fight terrorists in the aisles of a plane, he would take the quarters, put the in-flight magazine open in the middle and line the inside with quarters, roll that, take the hair ties and bind it. Now he has a baton. Then he would take the backpack with the clipboard in it and reverse it. He has a breastplate. And that was his idea for literally urban fighting in the air. So a baton was all he needed. If guys had knives or box cutters or whatever, he could have. He had the expertise as well. But something this big was all you needed in that tight space was the idea. So in tight spaces, a shorter weapon fouls on less things. It's more maneuverable, and that's why cutlasses existed in the Royal Navy and on ships at the time, is because you didn't want to cut the rigging, and there was a mass of people there, and big long swords with a big swing is going to hit something that you don't want or stop your blow from hitting. So shorter things, daggers, things like that.
Very good. Now, as a performer at the Great San Francisco Dickens Fair, you have witnessed the Steam Man.
Oh,
and
yes.
Professor Flockmacher.
Indeed.
If you were charged with protecting the citizens from a steam man running amok, what are your thoughts on how you would keep them safe?
I'm going to answer this the same way I deal with stage combat and anything to do with arms, which is how I do it if that was a real situation, and how I do it if it was a theatrical situation.
Very good.
If that was a real situation, a set of bolos thrown right at the legs takes the steam man right out. A net, anything that confines is the idea, because I assume steam man is very strong. So just wrestling or trying to subdue in a normal method would not work. So something that incapacitates. A little harder to do with a guy in a suit that you don't want to fall over and ruin the suit. So unless you had a big net you could cast. But in terms of theatrical, I would find some way to get a baton that looked like it was throwing electricity. In other words, prongs, think of the things that they used on the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park, the cattle prod type things, but get it so that you could have the sparks that are not connective at all, conductive on the tips of the things, but the spark in front of it. And then the electricity might wear him down or knock him out.
You've just described what I carry with me when I am guarding the steam man.
Nice.
Well done. Well done. If you will please tell the audience what you have studied, and then we'll talk about how you teach that.
I started watching Robin Hood when I was a kid, and I wanted to be Robin Hood. And ironically, cowboys, Robin Hood, knights in armor, those were all the things that I fantasized about and managed to do all those things in my life, which is pretty fun. But it started with the fantasy end of things. It's like, oh my God, this is so much fun. Why can't I do this? Well, the best thing I could do in college was to be a fencer. So I joined the San Diego State fencing team, became captain of the saber team for 3 years. Our coach was Hizaburo Akawa, who was 7th, I think, in the Tokyo Olympics. And he was one of these people that from the moment you met him, you went, oh, this is what a master is. You know what I mean? That aura was there. He was polite. He was kind. But you just knew he could take you apart if he needed to. And so that was the first time that I ran across that kind of brilliance. And I absorbed as much as I could and did fencing. Then shortly after I graduated from undergraduate, I realized I wanted to be in the theater. It's what I wanted all along. And so I went, as you did, to San Francisco State in 1980 to start graduate work in theater, because that's really what I wanted to do. Now, San Francisco State in the early 80s was considered one of the best theater schools in the entire country. Annette Bening was a classmate, Michael McShane, a bunch of writers, Reed Rollman and Greg Proops, a bunch of people that were all there at the same time. And there were like over 200 shows you can do in a semester with all the different programs they had. So the education was just amazing. And I remember taking an advanced acting class from Mr. Chenoweth, who was one of the sage old men of the theater there. And he did a week of stage combat out of some book he had found, because, you should learn this stuff. And I went home and wrote 25 pages of why I had a better idea, all handwritten at the time. And I presented it to him, and he was a bit of a smartass. He says, well, when you teach your own class, you can use this stuff. And I went, okay, I will teach my own class, because I was a graduate student. And if I got a faculty member to assist me and chaperone me, I could do my own class. And the movement instructor said, I don't know anything about stage combat, but I'll just want to take the class from you. And so she agreed to do it. And Annette and Michael and a bunch of people all took that year. In the meantime, before I taught it, I went to England. And that's where I met William Hobbs, John Waller, who was the head of interpretation at the Leeds Army Museum, the greatest archer in all of England. He did all the longbow commercials where he snuffs candles and all that stuff with arrows. For fun, he and his friends took their war horses to France every year and reenacted the Battle of Agincourt. So that was his idea of a good time. But he was a fight director too, not as famous for films the way William Hobbs was, but he did a few. He did Hawk the Slayer. Oh, and let's not forget, John Waller did Monty Python and the Holy Grail. he did the fights for that. And you got time for a story or two?
Absolutely.
Okay. He told me, he said, did you ever notice that Graham Chapman, when he was playing Arthur, had this very silly sort of awkward style when he parried and when he was in a sword fight? I said, yeah, that was a very unique choice. He says, it wasn't a choice. He was just, and that's why he moved like that. I said, well, it worked for the character. He said, yeah, it really did. And then the other story he told me is he did the fight between the Black Knight and the Green Knight. And the Python cast came to him and said, well, what we want is something Pythonesque. And he goes, what's that mean? He says, well, you know, a little bit of blood, a little bit of, you know, this and that. And he goes, well, I'll tell you what, why don't we do just something realistic and see how you like that? And so he made it as gory as he could. And they went, yes, that's exactly what we want. So that's how that came to be.
Wonderful.
So anyway, John Waller, I met him. Reg Amos was a armorer at the Old Vic and the National Theater for like 35 years. I got to go out into the countryside in his little carriage house where he had an armory. And he built me a couple of cup-hilt rapiers that I was able to take home with me that are just beautiful. They're made out of what is called gunmetal, which is bronze, as in bronze guns. And they're cup hilts. Interesting thing, an average stage weapon for a rapier is, if you're using Schlagers, like 36-inch blade. If you're using a lot of the stuff that we like to use, 37.5-inch blade for living history and everything. These blades were 30 inches long. They were really short rapier blades. And I asked Reg why he chose those. And he said, well, you're on a stage with all these people and they're all sword fighting. So a shorter weapon keeps everybody safe and allows you to pack more people on stage. So that's why he made them that way. So these are all the people that I met. Reg Amos, by the way, introduced me to Guy Williams, I think it is, who was the keeper of the blades at the time. And I got to roam around in the stores of the Tower of London when all the weapons were still stored there. All of the workaday weapons went to Leeds Armory Museum. And, you know, of course, all the stuff with jewels in it is kept in vaults and things like that. But basically, every suit of armor, every sword, every anything like that that is in any castle in England belongs to the Tower. And the Tower loans it out. And so that's the people I got to meet in 1980. And it was a great start. One of the tenets that I got from Bill Hobbs was verisimilitude. No matter whether it's comedy, whether it's deadly serious, and you can do the Duelists versus the Three Musketeers, you still have to have the characters believe they can die. Whether there's comedy involved or not, there has to be that kind of realism between the characters. I used to describe the animated film of Peter Pan as realistic sword fights. Why? Because the two characters believe they can die in that sword fight, even though Pan, of course, is very confident. So that's what makes a real sword fight. What makes it realistic depends on your production values. So if you're doing a cartoon, that's one thing. I did Peter Pan for TheaterWorks many years. That was their Christmas show. And what was realistic for 5-year-olds is very different than if you're doing the Duchess of Malfi and blood is dripping off of everyone. You know, so you have to pick that based on your production, but it can still be realistic within the realm. And that's, I think, very relatable to steampunk, to science fiction. There are things that some people who are not into the genre might think are fantastical. And how could you ever believe that? But once you accept the weaponry, people are people. Weapons can only be moved certain ways, no matter what culture you're in. I like to say that the medieval knights and the Japanese samurai, the only difference is how they moved, because one set chose really heavy armor for the most part. And in samurai armor, it's very light and mobile. And if you've ever seen samurai run around in one of the movies, they're very mobile compared to their European counterparts, I think. So the style was designed and developed from their set of circumstances with armor, weapons, all of that.
So now let's talk about your teaching methodology, and perhaps you can share with the audience where you currently teach and what kind of stuff the students are learning.
I've been teaching since 1980. Was a professional fight director. I did it for a living, made my living being a professional fight director for about 18 years, from 1980 into the 90s. Won 5 Drama Critic Circle Awards for my work. So it was a great career. It was really fun. I think I did a lot to take stage combat out of the bish, bish, bish of Errol Flynn films and make it more like Hobbs, which is realistic with the weapons of the period and things like that. And as you know, we worked together at American Fencers Supply, and in the armory where I work, I was always trying to get more realistic blades. The Schlagers came along right when I started, and it was just like a godsend, because all of a sudden you're not fighting with an epee blade anymore, which is not at all what they would have used unless you're using a 19th century dueling sword. So that, and then the cannelures, which I helped bring in, was one of the first big rapier blades that was available. And now some of the stuff coming out of Paul Chen, China, those are even better blades for that. So that's great. So my approach, I started teaching back then. We've been in our current space for about 18 years. The Albion School of Defense meets Tuesday nights in El Cerrito at the El Cerritos Veterans Hall. We're not back yet because of COVID, but we will get back. Over the years, there's probably been 500 sword fighters that have moved through classes since the 80s. As I said before, when you get people that are fantasists or do Ren fairs or things like that, they want to be sword fighters. They don't want to just put it on their resume. So these are people that want to train. So you get people that train longer, much like you do in the martial arts. So I have had the Albion School of Defense since 1986. I believe it is one of the oldest of these types of schools for stage combat in America. And what I mean, these types, we do stage combat, but what we do is as close to historical sword play as we can. The martial way, the sport way, the theatrical way, those are all things in my mind that are not separated by anything but what the outcome is, what you're trying to put out. You're either trying to win about, or you're trying to show an audience how they win about, and one is sport, one is not. So I always believe that you should try and know how they actually fought and incorporate that as much as you can. That's what was such a giggle about Princess Bride when it came out. Nowadays, so many sword geeks out there, and they love to hear, oh, I see you're using your Agrippa. Well, back when that came out, there were very few of us that knew all those names. And in the theater, when he starts name dropping, we just started cackling. We just thought that was the funniest thing in the world, because he had done his research. And in the old days, there wasn't much. Now there's books on everybody and interpretations of every master. Back in the old days, you had Egerton Castle, maybe a little Hutton, and people like that to help you understand what, Capoferro was like, and Agrippa and things like that. It was simplified, but it was great. And I remember that I learned that stuff back in the very early 80s by going to UC Berkeley, and there was an original copy of the Castle book in leather that I would check out, and then I later got a copy of it. But now there's so many resources, it's great. And so if you know how the sword is actually supposed to move, you can definitely translate that to the sport. The only thing that I like to tell people about sport is, and this is very true of fencing too, people develop styles based on the fact they know they can't die. And what that does, it makes for very sloppy sword fighting, and it makes for sword fighting that's based on time alone. It's time and measure. There are other things involved with an actual sword fight. And so I think the more you study the martial way and know when you're dead and when you're not, you will find the right time to give the blow that wins the sport and not get yourself killed. because a double hit is useless. Yeah, you have to invent rules so that people go away after a while if there's a bunch of double hits. But basically, when people were trying to defend their lives, most of them were a lot more careful. Not all of them. There's two swords that hang in Reynolds' house right off of Wimbledon Common. It's an old 16th century castle. And in there is the story of these two rapiers where these two young gentlemen, much aristocratic hotheads, challenged each other a duel on Wimbledon Common and rushed each other in the first pass, killed each other. So yeah, that happened too. But the idea is the real seasoned people were the ones that knew how to defend themselves. That's why in the Old West, gunfighters never went after other gunfighters. As they like to say, there's no money in it.
Speaking of that, in the steampunk verse, there are Nerf. And there are those folk who want to play Nerf games. With the proper protection, it can be done. I understand that you're very, very active within SAS, the live action shooting.
Yeah.
And what would you convey to the audience with regards to Nerf dueling?
When it comes to the cowboy action shooting, which is like IPSC, where the guys in the police thing pop out and you got pop-up bad guys and good guys and all that sort of thing. But it's done in the Old West, which was really a lot of fun. And I was around when it started in the mid 80s. So it was just so much fun. You learn weapon control. Because it's obviously not a duel with somebody else, but it's timed and it's based on accuracy. So that's how you win in those. And you're using all the guns of the Old West with live ammunition. And one of the things that teaches you is one of the tenets of Wild Bill Hickok: never miss. Take your time and never miss, because the neophytes at the trade are the ones that are going to be slinging steel, literally, like they did in the old Roy Rogers stuff, where they're not taking aim. And that's one of the things that Hickok did. He never missed, and he was cool. So he just took his time, boom, and it was done. Whereas, in the heat of the moment, or there's a great story about Doc Holliday and one of his antagonists, I can't remember who, but they were sitting both drunk at a poker table and got into a gunfight, literally emptying two guns each at each other and never hit anything. And so I would say accuracy is the main thing. Take your time, be accurate. Also, know your weapon. Make sure that your weapon is accurate. I find in the Nerf world, because I got into Nerf guns about 2 years ago, and I started taking Nerf guns and building them into these space weapons that, was just so cool to do the props work on. But I also wanted them to work. And what I found is the darts just are really inaccurate. The balls, however, the Revel stuff, those are accurate, and they actually have enough velocity to go farther than 20 feet, so that you could actually sniper people and things like that. So I highly recommend those weapons.
Have you done any force on force with those type of space weapons?
No, and I have the costume, which I put together for Halloween, and I know that there are some role-playing weekends that are done with Nerf, and I have friend Garrett Enberg is a good friend who does those, and I always wanted to do it because I thought it'd be really fun. These days, of course, there's so much you can do in that realm. The whole what's the plastic BBs? I'm forgetting the name of the weapons.
Airsoft.
Yeah, the airsoft community now is just, you can go online and these guys are dressed in tactical gear completely. They have sniper rifles, they have cameras, so they can film the whole experience right on the weapons and on themselves. So it's really a lot of fun because you get to live and do it again.
Yes.
So one, I would say, know your weapon and practice reloading your weapon. Very important that every second you lose reloading, it's just like the old GI movies. He's like boom, boom in the dark, making it happen and happen quickly. That's time. And just like in fencing, time matters. So know your weapon, make sure it's accurate, take your time. Those are my advice. My email address, the Captain Glover one, would be great. Anybody who's interested, please get in contact. I'll tell you what we do. The Albion School, we have, well, last I knew we had about 10 people in the classes. And basically what we do is any kind of weapon anybody wants to work on. We use steel. We use wasters if that's what people have for a certain genre. We have quarterstaffs. We work on that stuff. And one of the things that the school does is do theatrical performances. Nowadays, that's kind of limited. The only one we do as a group is the Pirate Festival in Vallejo every year, which didn't happen this year. But we have a show, and there's a bunch of sword fights with all the weapons of the pirate era. And then we put a half-hour comedy show with that. So there is some performance that you can do, but basically it's learning how to be effective to an audience. The best part of a sword fight in a film is when it draws you in and it makes you think that those people are really fighting and that they really know how to use those weapons. And that's what anybody has to portray to be successful, whether it's in a Star Wars movie or whatever. They have to look like they have a command of that weapon and know how it works. And then, of course, editing helps you out when you're doing movies. So it's not like live theater where it's a little harder because you got to do it 8 times a week. So yeah, Albion School of Defense with an E on the end of school. And our website may be up, it may not. I haven't talked to the administrator in a while. But yeah, we're there.
Very good. And what city is that in?
El Cerrito. So it's right off of San Pablo at Stockton. In the
so it's on the East Bay of the East Bay of the San Francisco Bay Area.
Yeah, just north of Berkeley.
There we go. Thank you. And was there any other topic that you'd like to communicate to the viewers?
Well, you know, it's all fun, right? That's why we do this. We do it because it's a fantasy that we want to get involved with. That's why people did Renaissance Fair when that started. That's why people did Dickens Fair. It was those things that that really they love to do. I'll give you an example. Steampunk is an extrapolation of something that when Dickens Fair was started, it was only Dickens characters. That was it. And I had been part of the company with the Pattersons since the early days in Agura. And I was one of their writers and directors and a theme character, as we called them. I played William Shakespeare for 10 years. And I felt it was a disservice that we didn't include other literary Victorians as well as actual Victorians. So I invented what was called the Adventurers Club. And what that was Edgar Allan Poe and all the military generals and Rudyard Kipling and Sherlock Holmes and all of the people that for Victorians were very famous that people would have known from books or movies or whatever that took the Dickens Fair to another level. And I think that's what steampunk does. It extrapolates from both of those into what if and going down the road. And I think that's great. The Renaissance Fair had fantasy, but it just never really took off the same way that steampunk did in terms of its own universe. So it's building on what's come before. If you like the fantasy, any part of that, join in and have fun. And I think more people enjoy what they do, the more authentic they feel. So you learn your history, you get your costuming right, and if you're gonna use weapons, learn how to use them. So when you're doing some kind of a sparring thing at one of those events, you don't look like you're playing patty cake with lightsabers, right? You look like you might actually know what you're doing, because that's when it's cool.
Thank you, Mr. Cawelti. I really appreciate you joining us and giving us your school of thought on all of this. Thank you very much.